Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Thank you so much for checking in today. I have Cynthia Cherrey and I have Elisa, Mallis. And we are going to have a fun conversation. This is a conversation all about, in many ways, partnerships. So, Cyn, why don't you share a little bit about you, and then we'll introduce Elisa, and then we'll talk about what's going on.
Scott, it is good to be here again. It's always a pleasure to be on your podcast. I am Cynthia Cherrey. I am President and CEO of the International Leadership Association, which is the largest membership-based association for all those who are interested in the study, the practice, and the teaching of leadership, or Scott, as we talk about it in terms of leader development and leadership development.
Thank you. And an organization near and dear to my heart, my academic home for decades now. And Elisa, another organization near and dear to my heart. I'll share why in a little bit, but tell us about you.
Thank you so much for having us, Scott. Yes, I am working for the Center for Creative Leadership in the role of Global Vice President of Research, Innovation, and New Content Creation. And actually, I'm based in Singapore. I have been with the center for longer than I've been in this role. In fact, I started off 7-8 years ago looking after the business in Asia Pacific as the Asia Pacific Managing Director. And for those who know CCL, we have been around for more than 5 decades. Leadership is all we do, focused especially on evidence-based research, and also deliver programs in leadership all over the world, including here in Asia, where I'm based.
You know what? Cynthia McCauley was on my dissertation committee. Oof.
Oh, wow.
Yes, and I was so lucky to have her on the podcast as well a few years back now, but have had several CCL guests over the years. And so just an organization that I think the world of. So there's a partnership going on, Cyn. Would you talk a little bit about ILA and CCL and kind of what we're up to here?
One of the things that we've been really working on in deep conversations is around the whole concept of global leadership. And the ILA has done a series of events and gatherings and convenings to talk about that. And we all know that the study of global leadership is still fairly new. We also know that people think about it differently. Some look at global leadership from the context and the culture of a place, and others think about global leadership as this global process or a global mindset. And so the ILA brought together a series of convenings to talk about this and explore the concept, such as we brought together the Yale world leaders to talk about their experiences, and we connected them with leadership scholars to talk about it. Another one we did was with multilateral institutions in Geneva. So the World Health Organization, the Interparliamentary Union, all of those who have this global concept to talk about their challenges. And we also wanted to do something specifically in Asia with global leaders, and particularly with a business perspective. And one of the ILA board members is and works for CCL and is a senior position. And David Altman said, Cyn, you have got to meet Elisa. And I was doing the keynote over in Tokyo. And so I hopped over to Singapore to meet with Elisa and her team. And the very first meeting we had as we were sitting down before Elisa was able to join us, we were talking about the ILA. And one of the CCL members says, my favorite resource that the ILA has is Bernice's, Scott Allen's podcast. I listen to it every new episode that comes out.
Nice.
And so it was just fortuitous that we got together. And this partnership has really grown and blossomed, and through a number of different projects that I'm really excited for Elisa and I to talk about today.
Elisa, why don't you share a couple of those projects with us? What do we have cooking here?
Yeah, at first, I just want to mention, Scott, that Cindy McCauley, I heard about just a few days ago, in addition to you mentioning her today, for a dissertation of a CHRO in India. So we were in India last week hosting senior leader roundtables in 3 cities. And at the end of the last one in Delhi, I was just so surprised. Actually, it was the second one we had in Mumbai, and we were having the dinner. And she told me this story about how her dissertation was all around the concept of directional alignment commitment, a key CCL model, and how helpful Cindy McCauley and responsive she was. Such an interesting global connection and a testament to how our work has really reached all parts of the world. And so in the connection with ILA, and I also want to just mention that CCL's had a long history with the ILA, including the Kenneth Clark Award honoring a former CCL president, many pieces. And in the kind of connection that Dave Altman made, as Cynthia and Mark Hardy and others from the ILA were looking at really expanding the work to include an Asian point of view, especially having done the work really mainly in the US and in Europe. A couple pieces of our research, one of them is called the Global Asian Leader, really got their attention. And we were doing that work from 2018 and 2022, really trying to look at leadership through an Asian lens. And then also had a focus over the last couple of years around the work in the area of polycrisis. And kind of all of this came together as we sat down and we said, wow, we really can take this further together and go into sort of a next phase. And the events that we did in Singapore to do that, first of all, we convened scholars and also government leaders and business leaders. We convened business leaders, and there weren't as many business leaders involved in the study up until that point. And we really had a very interesting interactive event that we used a new concept called the World Cafe on AI. Maybe I can talk about that later. We tried that out. And our second event was actually through the American Chamber, where I serve on the board for a number of years. I chair the board, and in partnership with the CEO, who I think you've also had on this podcast, Dr. San Lee, we hosted another event for the CEO group. There is a CEO forum, and we brought a number of them together to sense test what had come out of the first event. And those 2 events really brought us so many interesting insights. In the World Cafe on AI, we analyzed some of the output in real time. And really powerful. I think what was very powerful was hearing from such diverse leaders across government as well as business, and coming from with perspectives across the region, but very global at the same time.
Cyn, how about you? What observations do you have? I know you were very excited.
I think the combination of the intellectual capital that was brought together with ILA and CCL, our partnership, as Elisa has mentioned, has grown over the years. And bringing together these different perspectives, because as we were talking about global leadership and what does that look like, and the polycrisis work that Elisa and her team were doing, it all converges on this time, this point in time where I say everything that was is tripping over everything that is, right? In terms of geopolitical turmoils, the intensifying disruptions, the global challenges that are getting more and more complex. So as we talked about this and bringing our two ways of looking at this together, and then broadening it out to having these, I think Elisa was about 40 to 50 people in the room in this World Cafe on AI. It was like a World Cafe on steroids, quite frankly. And as we talked, everybody engaged in the conversation and the questions that we developed. And there were multiple things that came out, but I think we zeroed in on about 4 key points that are really about the knowledge shifts that are taking place for global leaders overall.
So talk about those 4 shifts. What were a few of those that were on the radar?
Yeah, I think, and Elisa could jump in too, because this is really our high level where we had the World Cafe, and then also from the feedback from the CEOs at the chamber lunch, which was also a very profound experience to have them in the room. But the 4 areas that came out was knowing your challenges, right? And the second being knowing what is possible. The third was about knowing your networks. And the fourth was about knowing your competence. So their knowledge shifts, and talking about knowing your challenges. Right now, there are so many different challenges that are taking place, right? What are the priorities of the priorities? Or as we talk about is what do you need to deal with today? But what really can you look at later down the road, even though they're all priorities, right? And every crisis, but you have to, in many ways, when you go through global crisis, or when you go through a crisis like I did at Tulane with Hurricane Katrina, it's all out there, but you have to focus on what do you know? What do you need to do today? And how are we going to get done? And so I think this is an experience that leaders, especially corporate leaders, are really finding out is so important. So that was one of the aha moments that came out of it. I think the second one was we always talk about aspirations, which are important, and what we desire to do. But really, it's more knowing what is possible. What are the possibilities? But really, what is it that we really need to do? And I love this. One of the individuals in the cafe talked about leadership is about what's possible. She goes, I always thought it was about what's impossible. And leaders do the impossible, but how do you really make meaning out of it and move it forward? So that was the second. And then that third is really this whole sense about leadership, as another person said out of it, said in our Singapore summit, said, leadership has become more of a team sport, right? And it goes to the things that we talk about.
Yep.
You have to collaborate. You have to partner because of how nuanced it is and how complex it is. So the partnerships, the collaborations are so important in that piece. And then knowing your competence, I think it's really a matter of shaping. It's different. And now it's not necessarily the skill set. It's more about capacity and capabilities.
Okay, so Elisa, you just heard Cyn summarize. What would you like to underline, bold, augment? What stands out for you? You could disagree with her. We could have like fireworks here on Practical Wisdom for Leaders. Really, the whole options are on the table.
I fully agree. And I'm going to add on that even since these events, we have been interviewing leaders, particularly across Europe and Asia, and gathering additional insights. And I think that we're seeing some very interesting things. I want to share one of the questions we ask when we're doing these interviews is asking leaders to look out to 2050. seems to be so much kind of gloom and doom. If we look at the news every day right now, that is certain. And that's not just in the United States, particularly in the US, but really all over the world. If you look out to 2050 and things turned out better than expected, what did leaders get right? What did we get right? And I love this question. And so we've been asking it, and also in events since that event that have taken place, I've been asking this question, and different things are coming out. There is a theme in particular in some of the interviews we had here in Asia that we got the AI right. That is certainly one very big piece, one theme that's coming up. Saxo had these like outrageous predictions for 2026, and there were a few interesting things there. And one of them was that we're going to have a Fortune 500 company appoint a CEO that is an AI agent that will be making decisions related to budgets and logistics and even hiring and so on and so forth. And it's a bit of an outrageous prediction. However, in some sense, it doesn't feel far-fetched. And so if we think about really in this looking ahead and this idea of what did leaders get right, one thing that comes up a lot and came up in the conversation was culture. And I think this isn't something new. I think Edgar Schein said the only thing of real importance that leaders do is to create and manage culture. And that has been coming up a lot in these conversations of how do we come back to what's fundamentally human and grow the capacity of the leader, not just their skills. And one of the things that, Cynthia mentioned that's coming up a lot is leadership is becoming less about having all the answers. It's being able to say, I don't know. And in India, as we were hosting roundtables last week, that was really coming up a lot, where we do have more hierarchical structures in place. So that was definitely coming up a lot. Another theme that I'm seeing coming out, and by the way, Scott, we're going to be putting out in the works, we have a longer report that actually has 6 trends at this point that come out of all this work.
Nice.
Some of the pieces that Cynthia mentioned, but more building on it. Another piece I see is the importance of balancing realism with vision and grounding people while inspiring them. And how do you do those two things? I think we had a pharma leader in our roundtables at the AmCham in Singapore that really brought this to life around the real challenges business is facing, and yet how you need to inspire people and remain grounded in some of the very difficult realities. I think that is very difficult for leaders right now. And one other piece I'll mention that's come up in the recent conversations is that globalization is not dead. It's just far more complex. And just how interconnected some of the dynamics between countries are. We can use the United States and China as an example. I actually lived in China before Singapore for a decade. And I see that relationship, the interconnection, far more complex. And how, as a leader, do you deal with those more complex decisions in this almost sort of new flavor of globalization? So I'll pause there. It's quite a few interesting things that we're going to be further exploring and putting into this report.
What I was thinking about as you were listing, Sin, as you were speaking, and as Elisa, you were talking about these different areas, I just keep coming back to polarities and tensions. We're managing all of these different tensions, perform and transform. Like we need to do our core business, and we need to transform into what we're going to become in the future. And how are we focusing on not only the culture and the people, but also, and I also loved what you said about, look, we need to be inspirational and we need to be grounded. So there's these both ends, there's these polarities that leaders right now, it's a tightrope act. That's my perception. Is that kind of coming out in some of these discussions that they're feeling that?
I think there's no question of that, Scott. And as Elisa was talking, and you were, we have to optimize the tensions, right? So how do we optimize those tensions and leverage the opportunities? Or even, this is part of, I think, the challenge is how do we look at the future? Because how do we prepare now for the opportunities that we don't even know exist? And so, for example, we always have been teaching college students that we're preparing you for jobs and careers that don't even exist today. So as a leader, That's what we also have to do. How do we prepare for what we don't even know down the road, right? Because we are becoming more complex and more interdependent. Part of this challenge.
That hits hard. My son is a senior. He's looking at schools and it's $400,000 to go to Vanderbilt University, and we don't even know what we're preparing them for.
That's exactly right.
No. Oh my gosh. To the two of you, I very much appreciate your time. Very much appreciate the work that you're doing. Anything else that you want to highlight just to underscore, bold, or underline with listeners, Elisa?
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, on our stream of work on polycrisis, the latest paper is all around graduate education and how, to what extent it is preparing. And so that's a very interesting one. It's this era of multiple interconnected crises and how they put us leaders at all levels, young leaders, in an ongoing state of uncertainty and what that does. Also, I think at that stage, that graduate education stage, and how well leaders are being prepared, there's some interesting findings and recommendations there. One of the pieces that, when we think about that and overall this work, human connection and doubling down on human connection is a theme that also I feel is very important. At the end of the day, it's interesting what in many industries is that we're also needing to come back to basics of live events, for example, whether that's kind of concerts, sporting events, while all the sort of virtual and AI and the technology is moving so quickly, there is that need to come back to the basics. And I think human connection plays a huge role in business. We're hearing the importance of trust and how, with a phone call, very complex things can happen more easily if there is trust in the relationship. And so for leaders, ensuring that doesn't get lost. And I think for younger leaders, establishing earlier on how to build those networks, those connections based on trust is very important. And with the pandemic, of course, for our younger generation, we lost some of that human connectivity. And it does, I think, come up and emerge as quintessential. It emerges as what is going to also ensure that we get that future state in 2050 for humanity. So I think that doubling down on human connection is another piece I've been hearing a lot about, and I hope will come with some recommendations. And we're also going to be including company practices in our report to really bring to life what other organizations, to give out practical ideas, right? What do we do and how do we tackle this? So I want to end on, 2026 really being very important for us now to not lose sight of doubling down on human connection.
Great. And Sen, as you reflect on the conversation we've had, what's the practical wisdom here that listeners should leave with? What do you think?
Couple things. I think Elisa started to talk about it, right? This human connection. We've always thought about leadership and the theories of leadership as they've evolved as being human, relational in many ways. But I think what AI has done is it is bringing this back to the forefront. So I'd say there's a couple of things. One is this real focus on human-centered leadership, as we're thinking about it. The second is around wisdom as a skill, in the sense that we really need to have the foresight as we think about these changes. So wisdom and judgment becomes so much more important as skills that we need to have, capabilities, capacities. And the other is authors of meaning. I think as we keep throughing this sense of making meaning and making sense, because we've got some gaps right now. So how do we make meaning as we move forward? But wisdom as a skill is going to be very important moving forward.
That's music. Well, that's my jam, practical wisdom.
Your jam.
And so, yes, let's end there. You all.
There it is.
Thank you so much. For listeners, we'll have some resources in the show notes for you. And Elisa, Sen, thank you so much for being with me. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for the work that you are doing.
Right back at you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.